time now for Media Watch with James Creedon. Hello, James. We have been covering, as one of our top stories today, of course, Yemen. And you've been taking a look at a report by the New York Times.
That's right. It came out on Friday and it's been getting a lot of traction online, chiefly because of the images that accompanied the reporting. Salam, they're absolutely haunting images taken by Tyler Hicks, who is a staff photographer at the New York Times. And I mean, for me, it's clear that that's why the article has been shared so much, despite the excellent reporting of Declan Walsh. Now, Tyler Hicks had been there photographing aspects of the war 3 different times, but he said to the takeaway, you can see this WNYCstudios.org, he said that really it was the worst that he had ever seen, that severe malnutrition, cerebral palsy at a hospital in Sana'a in Yemen, and so essentially the humanitarian disaster is escalating and it's worse than the 2 previous trips that he witnessed. And just to give you a sense of how bad it is, this little boy passed away just 8 hours after the article was published, or indeed after the reporter spoke with the mother. So you get a sense of just how bad the crisis is. Malnutrition at an absolutely huge level. The UN Security Council saying that it could go up to 13, maybe 14 million people being affected by starvation in the next few months. This is a massive, huge humanitarian crisis. And so this article seems to have penetrated some of the, I suppose, I don't know, it's got through that, what would you say, lack of interest, really, or a sense that it's a conflict that's very far away and that we don't know a huge amount about, and that doesn't have a face, has a face when you see reports like this.
James, this is a devastating war. You said it's one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time, but a lot of observers are saying the reason we're paying attention to it is because of the attention that's been given to the case of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. That's right.
The New York Times itself, one of the quotes in that article is, they spoke to a doctor, Declan Walsh, I presume, speaking to that doctor. We're surprised the Khashoggi case is getting so much attention while millions of Yemeni children are suffering. Nobody gives a damn about them, and you can understand a doctor dealing with malnourished children, huge rates of those children passing away, how you could be so frustrated at the media focusing on this one story. But I guess that's how the media machine functions a lot of the time. It's not always very fair. And indeed, The Guardian here, Patrick Winter, saying the Khashoggi murder may be a tipping point in Yemen's agony. And joining the dots between the death of a Saudi journalist in Istanbul and the possibility of a ceasefire in Yemen may seem like a stretch, he said, but actually what this comes down to is the credibility, the standing of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which obviously took a massive knock after all of the fallout of the Khashoggi murder. We won't go into it all again, but certainly it weakened the chief architect of the war in Yemen and opened a new space for diplomats in which to operate, they say there. This cartoon that has been doing the rounds of Facebook, I haven't been able to identify the source of it, but it's been shared a lot on Facebook, and I think it says, it's in Arabic for the most part, Khashoggi assassination. You can see there the world reading it in the papers, and while Yemen, the agony of Yemen goes on. Nicholas Christoph, this is a tweet going back to August, and I think it's interesting to point it out because a lot of these remarks were kind of, they weren't necessarily very audible. If you go back to August, if you go back to prior to the Khashoggi affair. US and UK complicity in the Saudi-UAE war in Yemen is a disgrace. We in the West are playing a role in Yemen parallel to the role Russia plays in Syria. We're facilitating war crimes. In fact, there's been a lot of reporting that looks into that. For example, European arms sales to Saudi Arabia, which of course is leading that effort in Yemen, perhaps 60% of those arms coming from European countries. It doesn't give the breakdown, but France, Germany, the UK are the chief arms merchants in that case. When you see these images, you know, I mean, and these are the times we're living in now where it's very clear to citizens of countries where you have arms industries the consequences of doing business. And we heard Donald Trump's words at the time really talking very much in terms of business. We're not going to jeopardize these business deals. Well, there are consequences to those business deals, and we're beginning to see them now.
And yet we had Emmanuel Macron, our own president, say that the 2 cases aren't linked. James, I want to go back to this New York Times article that you've been looking at, and because of those somewhat shocking images, it was censored on Facebook, it seems.
That's right.
What were the reactions?
This was on Friday when the article went online, and for a few hours Facebook sort of implemented their guidelines when it comes to rules to do with images and nudity and whatnot, and you have a child and you have nudity together, therefore from Facebook's point of view this contravenes those guidelines. Now obviously the lesser of two evils in this regard is to ignore those guidelines and to allow important reporting to be shared on what is a platform for media as well, regardless of whether or not Facebook wants to fully acknowledge that, because it's always been a bit of an issue with Facebook in terms of, is it a publish, is it what is it? It wants to avoid this responsibility in this regard, so just having blanket rules like this. But in any case, people were very upset. You have, for example, sorry, I'm getting lost in my links here, but there were a number of reactions. Yes. I seem to have lost them. That's rather unfortunate. But there was one humanitarian organisation that was pointing out that this is just not the right decision. And there was even the New York Times itself, Eileen Murphy, spokesperson for the New York Times, saying that it's incredibly disappointing to think that this story would be blocked in violation of community guidelines. The job of journalists is to bear witness and give voice to those who otherwise would not be heard. The story is a stunning example of exactly that kind of work. So, not surprisingly, the New York Times very much taking issue with that decision. And indeed, Facebook did only implement that guideline for a few hours before realising the error of its ways, I think it's fair to say.
And of course, that's an ongoing debate. James Creedon, thank you very much for that Media Watch and a look at the devastating conflict in Yemen and